Every journey leaves a story behind. From remote roads and unexpected encounters to life-changing adventures across the globe, these are the experiences that shape who we become. Welcome to People, Places, and Things. And now your host, Ryan Lowe. Let's hit the road.
Welcome to People, Places, and Things. And today we have Tim Treadway joining us. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks.
Hey, man, you've been an Army Ranger. You've traveled all over the world. You've done a lot of things in your life. But I wanted to start a bit with your background and what led you to the Army Rangers and the Army in general, and what led you to travel.
All right, we'll go back a little bit because I kind of have to go back as a kid almost. Well, I grew up a whole lot of different places. My father was in the Navy. He had itchy feet, and we moved all the time. I'll be 70 this year. I moved 52 times, so that kind of gives you an idea. And there have been a few places where I've stayed for 10 years, but other places it's been a few months and then on to something else. I'm leaning towards not moving so much these days. It gets old. But anyways, when I was a kid, we lived in the swampy area just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And I remember doing some stuff that they would never allow today for kids. I'd go out in the woods at 5 years old by myself. I think that sort of gave me a sense where I connected with nature. And that sort of carried me later in life. I can see, for instance, when I go out in the woods often, I can see a snake when others can't. Even though they're blended in and camouflage, it's just, you have this movement thing where you can pick up the little subtle differences in animals and their color pattern. I can't say I'll always be able to do that, but hopefully I will, so that I don't get bit by a bad one day. So later on, jump forward a little bit. Then I got in the Boy Scouts a little bit. Was there for about a year and a half. Didn't learn a whole lot there, but it was good for me. And then my father being in the Navy, I wanted to go in the Navy, but at that time my grades were terrible. So the second choice was Army or Air Force, and the Air Force looked boring. So I joined the Army, and they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Infantry." They said, "Are you crazy?" Most people don't want to join the infantry because it's the hardest branch there is probably in the Army. But I chose it because I didn't like being bored. And then I chose my first assignment as the 82nd Airborne. So I found myself going to jump school right after my officer basic, and did that, and then went to the 82nd Airborne Division. It was probably a good place to start because it's hard. And it taught me a whole lot of skills about basically surviving tough stuff in the Army. My background, spending a lot of time in the woods as I was young, was very beneficial for me. I actually had an edge on a lot of other folks that were going in that branch because they joined the infantry, but they hadn't spent as much time as I had in the woods. And I think if you're in an environment, you pick up on it. It's just like somebody in any profession, you get really good at it. And after a while, I think I got really good at it. I didn't really start getting, then I'll jump a little bit about photography because all this brought me into photography at some point in my life. That came during my Army career as well. That was probably right around the early 80s. I started taking pictures. And then I got me a nice little, I think it was a Pentax K100 or K1000, whatever they call it back then, film camera. And that was a good intro, but you had to be careful back in those days because pictures cost a lot of money to make. So I used that a lot. And then later on, many years later, I jumped into digital. Now it's kind of hard to go back to film, but although film is still good. If you have a film camera, it's a great thing. You just got to be really choosy on your pictures. So I'll jump around a little bit. So early 80s, I started fooling around with photography. About right around 1986, I was still in the Army, and I went to Ranger School as a captain in the Army. which is not many captains go to Ranger School. Most people go when they're young lieutenants and they're young and dumb and they're not smart enough to know what they're getting into. I knew what I was getting into and everyone warned me about it. So I trained like crazy. We had to do a lot of crazy stuff to get into school. And I'll kind of go through the first day because that was difficult. We started with 236, right around 236 students. We lost 30 something first day. That was because of the physical fitness test and the swim test. We had to do a push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, a 2-mile run, and then a swim test. All you had to do was the minimums on the physical fitness test, but minimums perfectly. For instance, the pull-ups, you had to go all the way up to here. You couldn't go like this. If you shook, it didn't count. So I was fit in those days. I trained for it and I got ready. And when I pulled myself up, I went all the way up to here. And I looked at my instructor like I wanted to kill him, which was probably good because they like mean people. So it got me through there. But I went in February. It was at Fort Benning, Georgia. But you would think Fort Benning, Georgia, it's not so cold, but it's cold in the winter around February. And we had to do the second event. I think I took the swim test second, if I remember right. What they do is they put half the class goes in the swim test first, and the other half takes physical fitness test, and then you reverse. So I did fine in the physical fitness test. I kind of had a cold that day, which was not good, but I was a good runner. But I thought I was doing bad because I had all these people passing me. And I think I ran it still right around probably 11:30 or 11:40 for 2 miles, which is pretty good when you're in the Army. But it still kind of amazed me that all these people, but I think they were all scared to death about failing. So I was worried for nothing. But anyway, after that, got to the swim test. The swim test for Army Ranger School is 3 parts. The first part is dependent upon, they break you into 3 groups for that. So you have a 15-meter swim with full combat gear. You jump in backwards, weapon and everything, and you have to swim 15 meters without dropping anything. If you drop anything, they'll give you one more chance to pass it. And if you fail it the second time around, you're out. You get recycled and start all over. The next class, if you can get in the next class, you have to reapply. As I was about to take that part of it, I saw several people in front of me jumped in, and at least one of them sunk to the bottom. It wasn't moving. The water was basically just above freezing. So after a while, they took this big hook thing, pulled the guy out. I thought he was going to drown. So he was all right. And I said, okay, it's going to be cold. Just deal with it. So grabbed my weapon, jumped in backwards. And I'm like, froze. But then I started moving. And I swam like crazy. And I got out to the other side. They said, Treadway, strong swimmer. I barely knew how to do that side stroke. I had somebody teach me right before Ranger School. I said, me a strong swimmer. So later on in Ranger School, they made me a lifeguard down in Florida. I'm like, me a lifeguard. I can barely swim. But, crazy things motivate you. And so I didn't want to make it. So I swam like crazy. Did that part. And then the next part is it's a 3-meter high diving board, which is roughly about 10 feet. We had to walk off that blindfolded, all our gear again, and not lose anything. And then just, once you jump in, just swim to the side and get out. That wasn't that difficult. They take you to the end, and they pull your hat over your head, and they say, take a big step, Ranger. You go off into thin air. And so I think that's more of a test of your nerves. Make sure you can pass that. The last part of that swim test is, again, you got all your gear on, but this time you unhook what you call your load bearing equipment. It's hooked around your waist. It's got your canteens and your ammunition pouches, that type of stuff. You have to jump in backwards, completely submerge, get rid of your weapon and your load bearing equipment without breaking the surface of the water with any part of your body, to include a toe, a finger, anything. If you break the surface with any part of your body, you fail. That's what got most people. So again, I knew all about this because I had all these guys told me before. So I prepped and trained and trained and trained in an indoor pool before this happened. So the key there is you have to exhale when you jump in and get rid of all your excess air. Just have enough to do your thing. So that worked out great. I went down like a rock, held my arms sprung up, held my arms straight up like this. When you do that, you sink really good. And when that does it, all your stuff automatically just kind of comes up off of you. And you push that away, push your weapon away, and come up to the top. So I made it through that. But again, we lost 35 people the first day between those two events. Ranger school is roughly, if I remember right, about 9 weeks long, but I ended up getting recycled in the mountains. I didn't pass my patrols. You can get recycled for various things, sickness, whatever. I got sick there in the mountains as well, but not sick long enough to fail. But I think when you get sick and you're out for a day or so, they kind of start looking down on you like, okay, you're trying to get out of stuff. So that probably impacted their review on my patrols. As an infantry officer, failing patrols was not something I relished. It was like, how can I do that? I'm a captain. I should know this stuff. But again, Ranger School is it's a different animal. They try to break you mentally and physically. So at the end of the day, I went through the mountain phase twice. I was probably in the mountains a good 4 weeks at least. Very difficult. You do rappelling, cliff climbing, putting in pitons. You practice doing everything that a mountain climber would do. You got to learn that. Rope tying. They test you on knots. You have to do all these knots, and you have to be a certain length, the end of the rope for each knot to pass. That fails a lot of people there, the knot tying thing. Again, I knew about all this stuff beforehand, so I had a lot of help from people who were already Ranger qualified who prepped me. And I practiced and practiced and practiced. And it paid off. So anyway, after I got recycled, I made it through that. Then we got down to the swamp phase. And swamp phase is in North Florida. We were there about March of '86, I think it was. Yeah. When I got down to the swamp phase, I was like, I'm home. Because I'd grown up around the swamps and stuff. So to me, I'm like, hey, this is great. I love the swamp. I will say it wasn't always great because we were out in the middle of the swamp in the middle of the night at 1 o'clock in the morning. And even in March in North Florida, it's not that warm at night. So, but I did okay there. A couple things I remember, we lost a couple of students one night, and they sent helicopters out to find them. We sent up a head count. It's all silent for Rangers. It's just like, this is a sign for head count. And you go like that. So everyone knows who's what. There's no talking. Anyway, they found him. One of the guys, I think it was two, it was either one or two, they decided to go what we call AWOL. You may have heard that term. They decided to quit in the middle of the swamp. And they took their compass and map and walked back to the base camp. That wasn't very good for them because they ended up getting severely punished for that afterwards. You can quit Ranger school, but you can't quit where they got to send a helicopter for you. So I don't know what happened to them. It wasn't good.
Right. You can imagine.
But I'm sure they probably got reduced or some monetary taken away. Anyway, I made it through that fine, and then after that, I graduated. But I will say, of the 235 people that started, 63 of us graduated.
Whoa.
So Ranger school is hard. I did not go into a Ranger unit after that. I had to be Ranger qualified to go to the 25th Infantry Division, which is a light infantry division, which basically means you do almost everything on foot. Anything long, they either take you by plane and you land, or they take you by truck. But a lot of foot marches. Anything are the SOP, standard operating procedure, in Hawaii at that time was anything within 5 miles we walked to. So that's the way it was. So I got really used to walking. Again, I'll back up just for a second. As a young second lieutenant, 82nd Airborne, I remember the first time we walked. We were walking several miles for that day too. They pretty much had the same procedure: 5 miles or less, you walk. I was the platoon leader, which meant I was in charge of roughly 30-something people. My platoon practically left me. I'm like, okay, these guys walk really fast. I'm a short guy, 5'7", and so I found myself practically running just to stay up with the guys. I said, all right, so now I walk very fast. So that was my introduction to the Army. But again, when you're a leader, you're expected to lead and you're expected to not fall out. Otherwise, you don't last long as a leader. And your Army careers comes to an end. So I did all that. When I did get to 25th Infantry Division, I also went to another course out there, which was air assault school. And there you rappel out of helicopters. Now they do fast rope. They didn't have that when I was in. So I don't think they do rappelling out of helicopters anymore. I think it's all fast rope. It's a new technique. All I know is it's some slippery rope and you got gloves and you hop on that thing and you slide down really fast. I've just seen. Did a lot of training in the Army. Got to go, and again, early in my career, I went to jungle warfare school in Panama, and I was always fascinated with the tropics. So we parachuted in right beside the Panama Canal. I landed in a cut sugarcane field, fortunately, because the sugarcane can be a little sharp. You land in the middle of that stuff, the leaves. And that was kind of fun. That worked out great. 3 weeks after I got back from that, they sent us to Northern Warfare School in Alaska, 40 below zero. So I went from 80-something to 90s 1 month to a little over 3 weeks later, minus 40. So that was a good experience. I learned how to ski in the Army, learned how to ski with a rucksack, obviously. I learned how to go snowshoes and pull a sled and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of good training. All that combined with my stuff in the woods when I spent it as a kid and as a young adult really helped me to understand nature a whole lot. Because I spent probably at this point in my life, I would say over 5 years of my life, I've slept in the woods somewhere, be it the Arctic, the desert, the jungle. Even spent a night out on a ship in the Chesapeake Bay with the Navy because we cross-trained with them once. So about the only thing I haven't experienced, I think, is in space. So they don't do that. Not that I know of. And so it was really good for me. I always had a love for animals. And even as a child, I used to feed birds, probably starting as a teenager. My mother had introduced me to that. I sent off and got me a bird book and started learning all the birds. Then later on in life, as I started into photography, I wanted to photograph birds. I remember going on some trips out west, and I would see these guys with these big cameras. And I'd always ask them to say, let me look through your lens. I was always jealous. I didn't have a whole lot of money in those days. Not that I'm rich now, but at least I can afford a camera now. So I got the standard lens at one point, and I went digital. Digital is a little bit different. If you jump from film to digital, there's a learning curve there. Digital, you got to trick the camera sometimes. You don't have to trick it as much in film. For instance, if you take a sunrise or a sunset in digital tends to make the foreground all dark and the sunset or sunrise lighter. So what most people do is they put on what they call a split neutral density filter, which basically polarizes the sunrise or the sunset like a pair of sunglasses on it, and it gives it an even light. So I learned that little trick. But now cameras are so good now, I don't even do that anymore. I just adjust it in post processing. The thing about post processing, I find in photography, there's too much post processing for a lot of photography, and they make the pictures look fakey. You may see behind me these 3 pictures. All 3 of them have been slightly post processed, but only to bring out the color a little bit. I took these landscape photos. So I do landscape as well, depending upon where I'm at, because I like to take landscapes. But I specialize in birds. When I first met you, Ryan, we talked about that a lot. Now I go all over the world, wherever I want to go. I'll pick a spot. I'll do my research on it, and I'll learn about what birds are there. Most important thing is I'll learn about what's dangerous there. Not necessarily birds. There's no birds that I know that are dangerous except ones that like to attack you if they have young. So just duck. But there are dangerous snakes. There are dangerous things in the water. Um, Australia, for instance, has I think the blue octopus. I mean, really bad stuff. So you've got to know what you're doing and where you're going. There's the world is full of examples of stupid idiots going on these trips and not doing their research. For instance, there was a good case not many years ago where a couple of tourists were down in Mexico, and the locals told them about swimming in this lagoon at night. So they went for a night swim. They both got attacked by a crocodile. I don't know if one of them died, and the other one severely injured, but it was a really bad thing. I think later on they ended up suing the place, but I'm like, hey, had you done your research, you would never have gone in the water. So you've got to know what's in the water before you go. A good example, again, is in Egypt. In Egypt, I saw the stonefish, one of the most deadly fishes in the world. You step on that thing, they say you die an excruciating death. If chances of a survival are not very good because your pain just kills you through pain. And I saw one of them on the reef when I was out there, but we had idiots that they said don't walk on the reef. You got idiots walking on the reef. So again, not doing your research because you can't see these guys. They blend right into the coral. But the Army always said it's not the big stuff that you got to worry about. It's often the little microorganisms that disable most people. Mosquito, I believe, is the deadliest killer in the entire world, for instance. There's so many diseases and stuff on the mosquito. So when I go a place tropical, I treat my clothes with permethrin, and then I treat my exposed skin with it's 98% DEET. And then sometimes, depending on how bad it is, I'll even put a little bit of DEET on my permethrin treated clothes if the mosquitoes or the flies are really bad. Because I don't like getting bit by those things. If there's a chance of malaria, I take malaria medicine my entire time. Some things aren't worth taking a chance with. People take chances. They say, yeah, I'm saying, if you want to be that stupid, go for it. But I don't like taking chances. And I refuse to go any place on vacation where I feel like I'm back in combat. I spent 15 months in Iraq, and I had a 9mm on my waist at all times there. It took me several months after I got back not to reach for my waist thinking, where's my pistol? And I don't want to have that feeling going on vacation like, okay, where's my pistol? I've got no pistol. So I avoid those places. Like I said, more power to you if you want to do it. And so let's fast forward to an example of a adventurous trip, if we will.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, and I wanted to talk for a second and ask you, so being raised in the woods, growing up in that atmosphere, and then your training with the Army Rangers, it all culminated into when you do take adventures, you take a more methodical approach to each adventure, and you research, and you, like, even to the point of over research, even over prepared for those situations, right?
Yes, exactly. And I'll go through. A good example is Peru. It's my most recent trip. I've been to Africa, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe. I've been to Egypt, been to Japan, South Korea. Some of this with the Army, some of this on my own. I lived in Europe for 10 years, in Germany. Been a lot of things there. And now I'm really starting to hit Central and South America because I hadn't really seen a whole lot of that before. I've been to Panama before. Now I've been to Panama 5 times. That's where my jungle warfare school was at. But the most recent one I wanted to do was Peru, and that was in September 2024. Peru's got some bad areas, and that's mostly the northern part of Peru. I think they're still called the Shining Path Terrorist School. They still have kidnappings there. I didn't want to go there and take that chance. Again, birds are great. I want to see some stuff, but I'm not willing to go to a place to see a bird if I'm going to take a chance getting kidnapped or killed by somebody.
It's not worth it.
No, I mean, I think that the idea of being kidnapped doesn't scare me as that much. I know it's crazy. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about somebody pointing a gun in my face because I'm so used to that in the Army. I don't freak out. I know that sounds crazy, but That's who I am. I know that from my time in combat. It just doesn't freak me out. But still, you don't want to put yourself in a situation. It's not so easy. I don't want to have somebody come down and say, "Hey, okay, where's he at? You know, what kind of ransom we got to pay?" I don't want any of that stuff. So I chose to go to the southern part of Peru. My daughter had been there several years before me, and she told me about a group that she went with on a small tour. So they still existed. I said, "Okay, thanks for the tip," and I called them. But I wanted a specialized tour. And the reason why I wanted to specialize is Peru has 1/4 of the world's bird species. It has more birds, I believe, than uh, North America. I'm talking the United States and Canada combined. That's a lot of birds, a lot of exotic looking birds.
Were you looking for any particular bird when you were going to Peru?
Yes, I was looking for. There's a bird called the Watson. It's kind of a almost a prehistoric looking bird. It's got all these feathers that stick out. It looks like it's got an afro almost, but poked out like this. And they climb trees more than they do fly. Although they fly, they're found around oxbow lakes where the water is calm. Not so much along the rivers, but lakes, calm water. I had no trouble finding them when I was down. They're very, very loud. They're louder than chickens, probably. You know how loud a rooster can be. They're at least that loud. Very interesting bird, very beautiful, about the size of a turkey. So to give you an idea. And then the cock of the rock, I don't know, that's what they call it down there. I'd have to really look up what I'm sure there's a scientific name for it. It's an orange looking bird, orange and black. And you can't see a beak in this bird. Its feathers are so hidden that it looks like it's got eyes, but no beak. And when they mate, they tend to all gather in one spot, the males, and do these crazy dances. And we went there at about 5 o'clock in the morning. We had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to go to this particular location. It's called a lick, I believe is what they call it. I may be wrong on that term, but where they go in and they do this mating stuff. Other bird species in the world do that as well, but these do that. And I had to set my tripod up, and I had to manually set my camera. I tend to not use manual setting on my camera with birds because I find you often have to change too much. And so I like to do automatic. But in this case, with the low light, I didn't want my pictures to be grainy. So I had to set my ISO, which is your light sensitivity setting on your camera, really low. I think I set it probably about 400, which is fine with today's cameras. But had I left it on automatic, it would have been about 2,000 or something. Yeah, you get a picture and you know what it is, but trying to make it clean is difficult. But if you're going to bring your camera down like that in that type of light, you have to have it really steady. With a big lens, I had to use a tripod a few times, and that was one of the cases I used a tripod. Having said that, probably 90-something% of my pictures in the tropics is handheld. My camera is pretty big. I may show you that here in a moment.
And what lens and body do you use when you're going out for wildlife?
Let me move this for 1 second. See if we can do this. Let me know if you can see this behind me here. There you are. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. That's a 600 millimeter camera lens. It's a Nikon, and that's a Nikon Z9 camera, which I think that's still their latest. I don't believe they've come out with something.
That's the mirrorless, the full frame.
It's the mirrorless full frame. Yes. Nikon makes a lot of great cameras. Canon makes good cameras, and Sony make good cameras. That's probably the three big brands these days in wildlife photography. You'll see almost all the professional photographers have one of those three types of cameras. For years, it was Nikon and Canon, and now Sony's come along. I think I started today with cameras, I may go to Sony. They got some really nice stuff. But you go what's there at the time. Once you get into a particular brand of camera, it's kind of hard to switch unless you got a lot of money and you sell all your old stuff. My particular outfit with the tripod, the camera, and the lens, you're talking about $21,000. So it's
Wow.
very expensive. Uh, I did have a camera stolen, believe it or not, uh, by TSA at the Atlanta airport. Nothing against TSA, but it happened.
Wow. How does that happen? Did
Well,
what was
I
the
was coming back from a
circumstances?
foreign trip, and I had a carry-on, and they made us go through security again for some reason, and I had to go through X-ray, and I had a German with me, and I was trying to take care of him, and I forgot my bag, and I got to the hotel, and I realized, oops, I forgot my carry-on because I hadn't had much sleep. Well, it showed up almost 3 weeks later, minus my camera. So all I know was the last point it was at the TSA checkpoint through that. So who got it? I don't know, but I'll blame them because again,
Someone else has it.
yeah, someone's got it. Yeah. So I'm like, hey, if it got there, you should have watched it, but somebody didn't watch it good. But anyway, I did get some help from the TSA headquarters at that time. Said, hey, I got this situation. They got me in the right folks, and I got Delta Airlines is pretty much responsible for the Atlanta airport. They paid me 75% of the work, so I got some money back. So I ended up getting a better camera after that. But that was a sentimental value because that was my first good digital. I've had probably 5 Nikon cameras. Um, I doubt I'm going to get another one. I do have the D850, which if you're familiar with Nikon at all, I think it's probably the best camera out there. It's even better to me than the mirrorless. I know everyone's preaching this great mirrorless. It's not mirrorless, but the problem with the D850 is it's louder, and you can hear the. And so if you're around touchy animals like elephants, for instance, in Africa, may not be a good thing. So you like a quiet camera. So, but I still use the D850 for some trips. If I'm just doing birds and I'm not going any place where there's dangerous animals that I got to worry about the noise, I prefer the D850. I find the color just seems to be a better camera. Now, we'll talk about cameras just for a second. The Z9 has got a really good ability to track movement, especially a bird in flight. Once it locks on to something, even if you're out of the frame of it, it'll keep focus on the eyes, and it'll focus and take the picture. It's very, very good for that. The D850 doesn't have that ability. However, there's still a tracking ability, but you have to really stay with it. You got to 2 or 3 squares or whatever, and you put it on there and follow it. So for that part, it's a little more difficult, but I find that the quality is really, really good. So I have both cameras, and I've kept both cameras. If I go on a big trip, I put a landscape lens on one camera, and I put the big lens on the other. Depending upon my weight restrictions, I may just take one camera and switch lenses. Not that easy, especially if you're in a dusty environment. You don't want to switch lenses because with digital, if you get dust in your camera, it's not a good thing. Then you have spots all in your stuff, and it's really, really difficult to remove. So I've kind of jumped around a whole lot of stuff. But birding, just finding birds is not that difficult. I say that. I mean, you got binoculars, you find them. You may hear them, and sometimes it's very, very difficult to see them. You'll hear. I'm sure you've walked in the woods and you hear this bird. You're like, where is he? So after a while, you eventually find them. Photographing birds is a little more difficult. It's almost like fishing sometimes for something hard to catch because you're going to get only maybe a few seconds. Sometimes one bird is gone, and then you may not see it again for a long, long time. And if you're on a birding trip and you have limited time, that's it. You've lost your chance. I think what's helped me with birding photography is I detect movement really well. My hearing probably is trying to figure out where they are. I don't think anybody's that good at that. So that just comes with a lot of, okay, it's up there someplace, look for movement. But I played table tennis or ping pong, as some people call it, kind of semi-professionally for years, and it got me really good with my reflexes. So when I hand hold my camera, which is most cases in the jungle, because you can't do a tripod, it's just too fast moving. You got to go super fast, and so those reflexes from the table tennis, I'm able to go like this and snap. And that's the advantage of some of the new technology on the new digital cameras. You can go really fast, focus. I do what's called back button focus. If you're serious about photography, you make your focus on a button on the back of your camera, not the traditional focus button that the camera is set to. You're able to adjust it and put your focus there, so that when you take, so all you do is you hold the back button focus the entire time as you're on something, and then you press your shutter, and it doesn't affect your focus. That's the way to go. And again, I learned that by a lot of reading. So it's very, very beneficial for that. That's kind of how I do photography. And again, what I do is I'll find a place for Peru. Let's talk about how I did Peru. Again, I saw that they had all these birds. My daughter gave me a little bit about it. I talked to the folks and I said, I don't want your standard 9-day or 7-day or 9-day trip. I wanted a big trip. And so I did, I think, 32 days. I spent 3.5 weeks in the jungle. I flew into Cusco, which is very high. It's twice as high as Denver, Colorado, to give you an example. I never had problems with altitude, but I did with my eyes in Cusco. For some reason, I had my blood vessels in both my eyes in the corners burst, and I had really red eyes in the corners. So once I got out of that altitude, I was fine. I had no trouble with breathing and walking. You do notice you slow down a little. You're not like when you're 2 miles high, you're not going to fly around unless you're used to that. So I flew into Cusco. I had to, here's a little tricky part about tours with foreign companies. I had to pay, I think it was about $2,000 up front, and then $9,000 the day I arrived. I don't like carrying that kind of cash. Their banks wouldn't allow me to take out that kind of money. I'd already researched that. So I said, okay, I brought $9,000 in cash on me. And I had them pick me up from the airport, take me straight to my hotel. And at my hotel, we sat down and I counted the money. And I paid them, with the intent that the next day they would pick me up to start the tour. That's a little iffy. You're out of $11,000, and you got to hope that these guys pick you up the next day. Otherwise, you're flying back home. So
that's a gamble. That's a gamble right there.
Then I knew that my daughter had talked about it, and she had used it, and she said they were fine. And I did my research there. But again, with AI today, I think it's getting a lot easier to cheat. It's a lot easier to manipulate stats and say we're this and this and this. So you've got to read multiple sources. The best source is someone who's done it. It's try and talk to somebody who's been on a certain tour, and they'll give you that info. So sure enough, the next morning they picked me up, and we were in Cusco that morning, and I think the next day, in that area, right around the outskirts of Cusco, we went to a lake and saw a bunch of hummingbirds that first full day. I saw the giant hummingbird, which is about the size of a mockingbird, to give you an example how big it is. It doesn't have a lot of color. It's almost like a mockingbird in color, but it's called the giant hummingbird. So it was interesting to see, and a lot of other different hummingbirds. And then after that, we started. I had a guide. I had a cook. I decided to pay for a private tour, which surprisingly was not that expensive. And I'll go into that a little bit because I think it's worth your while if you want to do your own thing. I don't like being tied down to tour groups. I'm okay sometimes. And when I was in Panama, my first official birding group that I'd ever gone on with somebody else, it worked out great. It was really good, and everybody helped each other out. But it doesn't always work out that way, which is why I like to do my own thing. Because don't tie me down and don't say, hey, here's a bird I like. I've seen that bird 50 times. Let me find the bird I'm looking for. And so, but I would say this: if you're not used to going out in certain environments, you need to do it with somebody else first. Don't ever go on a safari in Africa by yourself, renting a vehicle by yourself, unless you know what you're doing, because you can get killed. It's very dangerous. I would say that Central and South America is not as dangerous as Africa, because there's a lot of animals in Africa that eat you. Not so much in Central and South America. Yeah, they got cougars and jaguars, but you rarely ever hear about something like that attacking people, unless it's an old lame cat. So you don't have to worry about hippos and lions and elephants and that kind of stuff in Central and South America. You have to worry about people. You have to worry about bad people in some places. But having said that, most people in the world are good. I'd say probably 95% at least of them are good. And so you've got to have some faith in some people, but you also need to make sure you do your research, as we talked about a little bit. I had done my research for there, and I knew which group I wanted to go to. So we went out those first couple of days around Cusco area and saw all that. And then after that, we went over the mountain. So I went even higher, probably 800 feet higher at least, to go over the peaks of the Andes. And then we went on the eastern slope of the Andes down, and after a few days, down into the jungle. We stayed in the cloud forest, I think 3 or 4 days. They call it the cloud forest for a reason. You can a lot of times see the clouds below you, or it's misty. But there are different bird species in every location. Cusco had different ones, because even when I went there, it got down to freezing at night in Cusco. It didn't get down to freezing in the jungle, I can tell you that. So we went over the Andes and the cloud forest, and that was fascinating. I saw a lot of great stuff. I saw the quetzals there. Quetzal is considered one of the most beautiful birds in the world. I saw I think it's either called the crested or the hooded quetzal. Very beautiful. And then the golden-headed quetzal. 2 of the quetzals there. I believe Peru either has 3 or 4 different species of quetzal, but I saw those 2. We got down through there, and then we went further down to the Madre del Dios, the Mother of God River. And we were on that river for probably a couple of weeks at least. I spent a total of slightly over 3.5 weeks in the jungle. At that point, we ditched our driver. He got us to the river, and then we no longer needed a driver. I needed a boat driver. I had a boat driver, a boat assistant, my guide, and I had our own cook. And that all came in my pay packet that I paid these guys for. Again, it sounds very expensive, but it wasn't. But I had a great cook. In some places, I'd say he's probably a 5-star cook. I got really lucky. And this guy was super, super good. If I wanted something to eat, he'd figure out how to cook it. If I say, hey, I don't like that stuff, give me more of this, he'd quit making that stuff. And so I said, this is what I wanted, this is what I did. Great guy.
Was it Peruvian cuisine? Was it mostly Peruvian cuisine, I assume?
Yes and no. For instance, they had a lot of noodles at first. I'm not a big noodle person. So, and then a couple of times he had rice. I said, give me rice. I said, I don't like noodles. But I think some of the stuff they made based on what they thought Americans eat. Well, I'm not a few noodles is fine. We did have Peruvian cuisine, but it was all kinds of different stuff. We fished, and I'll get in that for a second. We went piranha fishing a couple of times. That was a blast. So, yeah, a lot of different fresh stuff. They dug up some roots. I can't remember what it was. Some different roots, and we ate those. They cooked them. They're very good. Similar to, probably it was a starch, almost like a potato thing. Not tapioca, but something similar to that. And we ate that. We ate a lot of fish. Most of the time we ate fish that we caught, which was great. And a lot of different meats and stuff. And sometimes just vegetarian stuff. It was good. You end up burning a lot of calories in the jungle. Because I'm not a big sweater. I don't perspire a whole lot. But down in Peru, once we got into the jungle, I would say within 15 to 20 minutes max at the start of every day, I was soaked through and through my clothes. I only bring quick dry clothes when I go to the tropics. But having said that, it's still hard in some tropical places for even your quick dry clothes to dry. Once they get wet, you tend to have damp clothes. So I brought, again, a trick I learned in the Army, a lot of foot balance. You don't want to keep your feet wet. You get trench foot. Soldiers in World War One and World War II suffered from that a little bit, from being in the trenches and having their feet always in the water. So I learned that in the Army to take care of my feet. I carried a lot of socks, and you change your socks frequently. Everything that I carried clothes-wise, I kept in individual gallon or 2-gallon Ziploc bags, a change of clothing, so that everything was always dry. And then I would wash my socks. I often washed everything, hand wash, and then dried it. In most places, things dried. Sometimes they didn't. For the most part, even though it was humid walking, it was still dry enough to dry your clothes. It might take a day, but it did that stuff. And sometimes I'd hang socks up in the boat as we go down. The air would tend to do that. Again, you've got to take care of your feet. You start getting chafed or blisters or any of that in the jungle, it's not a good thing. So let's talk about this river a little bit. It's very interesting. Madre de Dios comes from Peru. It goes from Peru, cuts through a part of Bolivia, then it goes into Brazil and hooks directly into the Amazon. So it's considered part of the Amazon rainforest basin. And that's where I'd always wanted to go ever since I was a teenager. I was just fascinated. So I got to not only see that, but again, I went down there for the birds, but I also wanted to see the jungle. And I wanted to be in the Amazon rainforest because it was a dream of a lifetime. So I did it. There were times when we camped in tents. There were times when we camped with just a mosquito net over us. I will say this, in the most tropical environments, I think in Central and South America, I don't know how far down the vampire bats go, but they definitely have them in Central America. You don't want to sleep without a mosquito net. If you think a vampire bat's going to wake you up, you're probably wrong. They tend to numb your skin when they lick it or scratch it and lick the blood up. They don't suck your blood, they lick it up. And some of them can carry rabies. So again, do your research. Mosquito net, don't take chances. Tuck your mosquito net in around whatever you're sleeping on so nothing can crawl up underneath it. Big mistake people make again a lot of times. Don't just drape it over the bed and think nothing's going to come up underneath there. In Africa, for instance, I tucked my mosquito net into my bed every day before I left. I made sure I checked around to make sure I had no snakes in my life. Crazy. I wasn't as concerned about snakes in Central and South America for some reason. I never saw one except for one little grass snake. That's it. All the time I've spent in the jungle and in Africa, my biggest snake was this grass snake. Never seen another. I looked for her. I've seen more snakes here in the United States than I've ever seen in the tropics. This whole thing about this perception that there's snakes all over the place. Well, they may be, but you don't see them. Okay.
They know you're there. They're hiding from you.
They're there, but mostly a lot of them come out to feed at night. So unless you're out at night, we didn't go out in the evening much in Peru. If you do, you have to use to play it smart, you have to use a headlamp. And I brought a headlamp with me. I brought extra batteries. I never go any place without a headlamp and extra batteries, no matter where I travel in the world, just in case your power goes out. So they've got the bush pasture down in South America, in Peru. The thing, it grows, it's over 12 feet long. I think it's even bigger than that. So the trails there were probably 3.5 feet wide at the most. And so I'm like, well, even if I'm in the middle of this 3.5 foot wide trail, a bushmaster could get me no matter where I'm at. So my guide said, quit worrying about snakes. They're going to come out at night. He said, at night, make sure you use your lamp. So a couple of times we would get back in the evening, we'd walk a trail. And so I was really careful. Normally he always had me up front. My guide knew I was ex-Army. He said, oh, you lead. So I led. Now Peru was interesting because it's like being in a butterfly garden. I don't know if all of Peru is that way, but where I was in the jungle, there's butterflies all over the place. But there's also spider webs. I must have went through 1,000 spider webs. So if you don't like spiders, don't go to Peru because you walk through a lot of webs. Never got bit by any spiders. You just brush them. A lot of times I take a stick and find me do this, but after a while I got tired of that and I just started walking through it. Again, most of them are harmless. Do your research. If something's deadly, then do whatever you need to do to make sure that you don't get injured by it. Different websites out there. CDC's got a website. I think Mayo Clinic's got one. I heard the other day. State Department's got a website. The CIA used to have fact sheets on different countries, but I think they just dropped that. So you probably have to do that through State Department now. Read all that stuff. Read about what's out there, what's dangerous. Know what you're getting into. Be very, very careful who you trust. Very careful. I've always found that it's often the nicest people that are the ones that stick you in the back. So I'm not saying all nice people are bad. Just get that sixth sense and verify. You know, that whole
Intuition and the gut feeling. Follow that. Yeah. A lot of times that helps.
And then have fun. Make sure you bring the right stuff. When I was in Peru, just in case I got into trouble, I actually, believe it or not, I texted my son and said, if something happens to me and I get kidnapped and you get some ransom, I said, don't do anything for 30 days. Give me some time. Nothing happened, but my wife said, are you crazy? So, but I always had my medicine. I have low thyroid, so I always had that with me. I had a light with me, a knife, and a compass at all times, in case I had to do what we call survival, evasion, and escape. Just in case. None of that happened. I had a really good guide, but I mentioned to you earlier in some of our earlier conversations, we were 8 days at one point with no communication with the outside world. Once you get on the river, there are no roads. There literally are no roads for miles, and it's all river. And you'll find a little village here or there, but a village in Peru was maybe 5 houses, 5 thatched houses on poles. There are a couple of bigger towns, but there are highways that connect those. But other than that, there's nothing. The rivers in Peru are not like our rivers. They flood at a certain time of the year. And when they flood, they overflow their banks. They tear down trees, and they're filled with trees. And so the river is always changing. So you need a really good boat driver and a boat guide that help you see the trees. There have been cases, I listened to my boat driver, that people have hit trees and turned over, and I think they've drowned. So I know how to swim, but again, obviously, if you get turned over and get pinned underneath the boat, all the swimming skills aren't going to help you. You know, I didn't wear a life jacket when we went because the river wasn't that deep in most cases. You could almost stand up in most cases if you did fall over. Just don't panic. So that's my choice. But if you want to wear a life jacket, I know when I was in Africa, I didn't wear a life jacket because I felt if I fell in the river, I'd rather get eaten sooner than slower. Filled with crocodiles. We're just caimans in Peru. I saw one probably 12 feet long, and I'm assuming the 12-foot long caiman could probably do some harm. So I stayed away from those. The little guys I didn't worry about too much. So that was some of the stuff we did. It was exciting. The cook we would walk sometimes looking for a bird a mile into the jungle, and half an hour later the cook would come up with a 40-pound rucksack and fix us breakfast. Had everything, coffee, everything. So just outstanding people, went out of their way to take care of me. And I made sure I gave all those guys a really good tip when I left. Because you got to take care of people who take care of you. But my guy,
what is that company called? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's Wild Watch Peru, but I have to go back and get back to you to make sure. I think it was called Wild Watch Peru.
Got it.
Named it.
Yeah.
They were really, really good. They're out of Cusco. Just excellent people. The boss was great. She has some cabins down in the protected areas. We went down into the Manu National Park. You just can't go into Manu. You have to have permission. And so they only allow so many people in there at a certain time. And my guide, her family owns property in Manu. And so she had a place there with different cabins. And so I was able to stay down there a lot longer. I stayed probably at least a week and a half in that protected area. The normal tour is maybe a couple of days. But that's where the wildlife's at. Because of the the logging and the illegal gold mining in some cases, they're destroying the rainforest. They're destroying it. And politics has nothing to do with it. People will say, well, Bolsonaro was a bad guy and he was destroying the rainforest. I can tell you his successor is not any better, because I went down there and the successor, and they're burning stuff and logging and gold mining. It's really probably very, very difficult to control, and it's sad. But Manu, they protect really well. The armed guards, and it's really well. And I think they try not to go in there, but even sometimes I think the illegal loggers will go in there and try and sneak some wood out of there. And it's sad, because you lose all that, you lose a big part of the world. I'm not a crazy environmentalist and global warming and all that stuff, because I think global warming is a natural phenomenon. We're helping it along some. People can argue about that, but historically speaking, again, I have a degree in history, and I like the really ancient history, prehistoric times, and there's always been cycles like this. Again, we're going through one. We're helping it along probably a little bit faster than the normal cycle, but it's there. But it's other things that we can control. It's hard if you go around the world like I have. It's hard to tell somebody in a poor country, don't burn wood to stay warm when that's all they have, or don't burn coal to stay warm when that's all they have. And you see that in a lot of parts of the world. They don't have anything else.
Right.
They don't have this. They don't have solar. They don't have cell phones. They don't have all this crazy stuff. So I think we sometimes get all fixated on, we got all this stuff and we can make, we can put all our wealth and make the world great. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. When you get out in the real world, you realize, wow, even, trillions isn't going to fix this. What fixes things like that is going down there and trying to educate folks and trying to stop the demand for some things. I don't think we can. It's practically impossible to stop the demand for gold. But so there, I think the countries have to get down there and say, hey, listen, no more of this stuff. If we catch you, some really severe penalties for some of this stuff where they're actually, I went to one part of the jungle where there was nothing left. There was sand, no vegetation. I'm serious. Probably hundreds of yards, nothing. It was just dead. They'd killed it.
Wow.
It may come back. I don't know. But I think some cases they're probably using mercury in there, and I don't know what it does to plant life. I don't know. I'm not that smart on that chemical, what it does, or that element. So you see a lot of bad things, but again, there's a lot of good stuff out there. So a lot of good people, a lot of good wildlife, and I think for me, I try to be. The Army always taught us that we were ambassadors wherever we went in another foreign country. So I remember that, and I try to be a good ambassador for the United States and represent my country well, and be a good example and a kind person and a gentle person, and not go down there and demand something because I'm an American. No, I don't demand anything. When I'm in your country, I don't demand anything. I try to learn your culture. I learn it. I ask you. I learn some words in your language, and I try to use them. There was very little English spoken. My guide spoke some English, and my driver a little bit. The boat driver, the boat assistant, and the cook, none of them spoke English. So I put a Spanish app on my thing. Even if I didn't have internet, I could do some Spanish, and I wrote down some stuff too as a backup. And that worked. We got to go piranha fishing, I think 3 different times. And we put out some nets twice and caught fish. One time we caught enough fish that we were able to feed practically everybody in this one area. We probably fed 30 people with the fish we caught. It was a blast. One thing I did learn about piranha fishing is do not use a float piranha fishing unless you have a metal leader around your float, because they attacked my float and I lost all my gear, and that was my last hook. It's kind of fun to see what's pulling, but like, oops, I had metal for the hook, but I had no metal for the bobber. So the lesson learned is either no bobber or metal around your bobber as well. So it was fun. Catching piranha is a blast. The locals, they'll hold their hand like this to pin it down. I wasn't that brave. I stepped on it with my foot to take the hook. And it also brought me a little pair of those collapsible Leatherman type pliers, and I would take the hook out and then whack the fish. They cook them for us. So that worked out really well.
That sounds like an incredible adventure in Peru, man. I mean, there's a lot to intake there, and that's quite the experience. That company seems very thorough, and they know what they're doing. And sounds like you had quite the adventure in Peru.
I did. And one other thing that we did, Peru has a lot of coca, not cacao, coca, which makes cocaine. The locals use it for tea, and they also chew on it as a help with pain or a stimulant when they go high up in altitude. We ended up staying 2 nights in the middle of a coca plantation. I was in a nice little hut by myself on raised stilts, and coca looks almost like I don't know, maybe azalea bushes or something. It's a leafy plant, and this stuff was all around me. You don't see any wherever they are. I don't know where they are. They're not there. There's no drug stuff there. I think what the locals do is they pick all this stuff and they bring it and they sell it to stores. And I'm convinced that whoever's doing the drugs just buys all the stuff from the stores. And so it's kind of hard to go down in there and kill somebody's crop because that's their livelihood, if you will. So if you're going to get rid of drugs, again, I go back to get rid of the demand, because otherwise you're going to, these people use it, not just for to make cocaine. They use it every day. It's a part of their culture. So don't go in there spraying everybody's coca plants because it makes cocaine. Most of those folks, I think, if they know that it may be going to drugs, they don't care because they need money. They don't care. And they don't ask probably.
Right, they're trying to survive.
They're trying to survive. And so this is another thing where I think you've got to really look at things realistically. The funny thing about being in that place was they were really, really nice there. My guy told me, he said, this is the safest place in all of Peru. He said, no one's going to bother you here. And so it was true. So anyway, he bought a big bag of the leaves to bring back home because, again, they make tea with it and they chew on it, but it's typically used for tea. I never tried the stuff when I was down there, although I kind of wish I had at least bit a leaf just to see what it, I think I've been told it's kind of bitter, but just to experience the taste. But we were going back down the river, and his bag was probably about so big, and plastic bag, and it blew out because it was really light. And so I said, circle around. And so he circled around. I reached out and I grabbed it, and I said, I got the drugs. And so, yeah, but I didn't try to bring anything back with me. So
no, you're safe there. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to play with that.
But a lot of nice folks there. Good tour group. There are various ones down there. Again, the thing is, know who the good groups are. Do your research. I use TripAdvisor sometimes to read their stuff, just to read their reviews. That's helpful. And I'll go in and find out their websites and check that out. But you've got to do multiple sources. But again, I try to find somebody who's done it. All the time you can't do that. I had to pay for a safari once in Africa. I had to pay him, that would cost me $1,000 for 4 days, which probably wasn't bad. But again, I had never been on a safari before, and I didn't want to go by myself the first time. After that, I did go by myself. So, but I had to do a international transfer, $1,000, and my bank said, "Are you certain you know what you're doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to lose $1,000 or I'm going to get my thing." And so, sure enough, it worked out well. But again, I did my research. But now, again, with AI, it's spooky. I never go by a link that somebody sends me for travel stuff. I look it up on the internet myself. That's kind of how I do my research. Don't ever go with something that somebody sent you, unless it's a friend of yours who sent you that. Because you never know. There's so many darn cheaters out there. I've heard stories. People show up. The biggest story, I guess, is people will rent something someplace. They show up and the house doesn't exist. So I tend to stay
Right,
away from.
right.
I tend to stay away from houses. I don't do any of that stuff when I go. When I'm not sleeping in the jungle or in somebody's hut with a tour group like I did in Peru, I will use Booking.com for almost everything. I'm not saying they're the greatest, but they're probably the biggest and the easiest to use, and I'll use them. And sometimes I'll direct book. So there are different methods on that, but
It's best to vet people, like you're saying, multiple sources.
multiple
Do your
sources.
research before you're paying thousands of dollars for a trip or a tour guide or whatever agency it may be. You need to make sure.
Yes, and I just find that I've often heard this term that most accidents are avoidable, and it's true. You hear about people getting bit and dying, and you look back and you say, well, what did they do wrong? And so often they did something stupid. You may remember that guy, Steve Irwin, who got stuck by the
Stingray.
That was a fatal mistake on his part. He should have known better. But the guy was really good for a lot of things until that point in his life. He did his research and he knew what animals did. He got careless, I think. It's one thing I learned with stingrays, because there's a lot of them down in the southern part of the U.S. and the Gulf Coast, is I've never swim in water that is like knee deep. I wade out a little bit before I will get horizontal, just in case stingrays. And we don't have the really big ones that they did where he was at. I don't know if he was in Australia or one of the islands he was in when that happened. But Steve Irwin did a lot of research, and that's what you got to do. You have to know what you're getting into. You have to know what the dangers are. And if you don't do that, you're just asking for trouble. Don't go blind into something. Don't ask me to have sympathy for you if you die or you get seriously injured because you did something stupid. Now, having said that, things can happen to anybody. No matter how well prepared you are, things can happen. So one of the things I learned in Iraq, backtrack just for a second, is we got rocketed attack a lot for a while. And we had a saying was, if it didn't hit you, it was just a big noise. Other than that, the other thing I learned was, if it was your time to go, it was your time to go. It didn't matter how good you were. It had a whole lot to do with what time it was. Were you at the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time? And so nature's often that way as well. So you can do everything in the world, and sometimes, if the side of a mountain collapses on you, that happens. But again, do your research, because oftentimes there was just a case just a few days ago where some girl got swept out in the Pacific Ocean and died. I'm like, what were you doing as a father walking along that part of the Pacific Ocean where there could be rogue waves? I lived in Hawaii for 4 years, and I saw that almost every year happen to somebody. Don't go along the coast where there could be rogue waves where you're going to get swept away. Stay a safe distance. Beauty is not worth dying. It's just not. Again and again, research. Know what's out there. Never turn your back on Mother Nature. Never. So,
Man, Tim, that's sound advice. And I wanted to say, I think soon we need to wrap this up here. And I also wanted to say this is probably just part one
okay.
In the series with you, because I definitely need the part two from you, because you got so much life experience.
Yeah, we
I
can
think
talk
it's
about
just
Africans.
invaluable. Yeah. No, 100%. If I had more time today, we would definitely be going into that, but we'll save it for another day.
Yeah, I get long-winded sometimes. We talk quite a bit, Ryan.
No, I'm all here for it. That's what I'm here for, man. I want you to tell your story. That's what this is about.
Okay. I think
Thank you for coming on today, Tim. You left a lot of great advice, and I'm sure people can use a lot of that.
I think I'm dying now. I'll see you.
All right. Take care, Tim.
Thanks, Brian. Till next time, just let me know.
Yes, sir. And folks, always remember, the world is your oyster.
That's it for this episode of People, Places, and Things. Follow along at Ppt.travel.com, on YouTube at Ppt.travel, and Instagram at JR_low. Until next time, keep exploring.